All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for joining us today for the reshoring, nearshoring strategies for today's supply chain challenges. Super important topic. I think that everyone knows the impact that COVID and other things that have come as a consequence of COVID have unleashed on our supply chains and the effects it's had on our businesses. In many cases, small and medium-sized companies have gone out of business because they couldn't get their parts to be able to finish production of whatever they were making because they had supply chains really strung out, or in many cases really didn't understand their supply chains. And so we're going to be talking about a strategy that the speaker today, the main speaker today, Harry Moser, and I really are passionate about, and that is reshoring in particular, and as a secondary strategy, nearshoring. And so, Ms. Heidi, if you'll go on to the next slide, that would be great. Okay, so the Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions Department, which is a department within Arkansas Economic Development Commission, is a sponsor of this series of both trade related and supply chain webinars. And the mission of AMS, or the Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions, is to maximize enterprise value for manufacturers through innovation, operational excellence, sustainability, and leadership development. And in utilizing or focusing on those things, AMS is one of the main entities that can help with the concept and the development of reshoring and nearshoring strategies. And so they're somebody that you'll want to contact, and we'll have their contact information at the end of the presentation to discuss with you any reshoring efforts that you might have. The District Export Council, which is a partner with AMS and is the entity that's presenting today's webinar, is a part of a 60 entity operation throughout the United States, and we're the Arkansas District Export Council. And our mission is to strengthen individual companies and stimulate U.S. economic growth and create jobs. At the end of the day, in terms of ADC, the Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions, and the District Export Councils, the main goal is increasing jobs by helping companies with their trade-related efforts and helping them increase their revenues and therefore jobs. One kind of a housekeeping sort of deal is that some of the instruction here for your mic or speakers, in this case, your mics, and also to make you aware that you are able to submit questions and comments in the question panel. So do feel free to submit questions, and in probably most cases we will handle the questions at the end. But if I see something that really warrants me to break in and ask a question of Harry, I will do so. I will be speaking today on the nearshoring part, and specifically talk about the United States, Canada, Mexico agreement, because it really is the vehicle, the free trade agreement that really helps the nearshoring and allows a level playing field to make that a worthwhile strategy. And I'm the management consultant with Strategic Business Services here in Little Rock, and I also am the head of the education committee for the District Export Council. So our main speaker is Harry Moser, and he is the president of Reshoring Initiatives. And I will tell you, I usually try to keep the bios pretty short, but in the case of Harry, it's going to be a little hard because this guy has done so much and he's been such a powerhouse. And so I am going to probably go a little bit longer than usual, but I want to read this because I think it's important that you know that Harry really is a powerhouse in the reshoring concept, and really knows his stuff. Harry founded the Reshoring Initiative to bring 5 million manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. After working for a high-end machine tool supplier. and started as president in '85 and retired as chairman emeritus. And so, one of the things that I wanted to glean from that is that this is a passion for Harry. It's not just something that he decided just kind of to do. He started this initiative because he has a passion for bringing jobs back into the United States, and that's what's been driving him all along. Harry was inducted into the Industry Week Manufacturing Hall of Fame in 2010 and was named Quality Magazine's 2012 Quality Professional and the FAB Shop Magazine's Manufacturing Person of the Year, and to the Association of Manufacturing Excellence Hall of Fame in 2021. That's when I actually became aware of Harry. I'm just, really big time guy. They said, you got to know this guy. This is the reshoring guy. Harry participated actively in President Obama's Insourcing Forum at the White House, and also received the Manufacturing Leadership Council's Industry Advocacy Award in 2014 and Made in America 2019 Reshoring Award. I mean, these are all high-end awards that he's won because of the passion that he has and what drives him to be excellent in this section of the economy, trying to get jobs back into the United States, and having developed, the math, so to speak, and the methodology for making reshoring a real possibility that makes sense.
Screen.
Yep. There we go.
Can you see it okay?
Yep.
Okay, I gotta now pull the rest of you out of the way so I can see it. So I'll give you a little more background on me. I grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and this is New Jersey. The first European settlers came in 1660, and in 1670, one of my ancestors, Stephen Crane, built the Crane House. This is how it wound up eventually. And he had a relative, Stephen Crane, who wrote The Red Badge of Courage. Many of you have read that when you were in high school. It was the first American novel. And this is my grandfather, Henry Crane. He was born in that house, passed on in that house, and he worked for the local gas utility. He started as a plumber when he was 17. Retired when he was 86. Same company. When he retired, he was on the board of directors, secretary of the corporation. And his biggest customer for gas in Elizabeth was the Singer Sewing Machine Company. This was their factory when it was running. And in its day, it was the biggest factory of any kind anywhere in the world. 2.5 million square feet, 5,000 workers. It was a Goliath of its time. And my grandfather was a foreman there, and my father, Ray Moser, ran about a third of the factory. I worked there summers in high school and college, and I went past 20 years ago, and nothing of Singer's made there anymore. Everything, as far as I can tell, is imported. So you've got thousands and thousands of jobs lost, suppliers, all this kind of thing disappeared because of imports. And during my career, I sold machine tools and I sold foundry equipment. And I tried to sell them to industry after industry, company after company, and they went out of business before I could sell them anything because imports had wiped them out. And so I said, somebody's got to do something about this. So that was my motivation for founding the Reshoring Initiative. And you can see what's happening. You give you some statistics here first. The U.S. manufacturing output at best is plateauing. You can see the green line almost flat, and that's measured by value. And I'm sure if we measured it in tons and in number of pieces and so on, that it's actually declined. And as a result, manufacturing share of GDP has declined substantially over the last 40, 50, 60 years. But it isn't that we don't consume goods. Everybody says we're a services society. Well, we consume, we've increased our consumption of goods at least as fast as the GDP has grown for the last 15, 20 years. So we're definitely still consuming goods wildly. We're just not producing enough of them anymore. So this shows the trade balance. And we've gone from being positive back until about 1980 to consistently negative and a growing trade deficit being the amount that our imports exceed our exports such that last year it was $1 trillion. That's trillion with a T. And that $1 trillion to overcome that, to balance that trade deficit, which is what all countries in effect have on average, their balance, to balance it would require over 5 million additional US manufacturing jobs, which would be a 40% increase in US manufacturing. So having that trade deficit occur has had a dramatic impact on our economy, on manufacturing jobs. You can see they've declined from about 27% to about 9% of total US employment. And if you put those last two charts together, you can see a very strong correlation and in reality, a very strong cause and effect relationship that the decline in the increase in our trade deficit is the major driving factor in the decline in US manufacturing employment. And that decline in manufacturing employment is the loss of all those solid middle class jobs is one of the major reasons for the income inequality that we hear so much about. So the question then is, why did we lose it? Because you have to understand why you lost it to understand how to bring it back. And we did a survey with Plant Moran, one of the largest consulting and accounting firms. And we asked manufacturers and distributors, to the extent that you import product, why do you import it instead of making it or sourcing it here? And overwhelmingly, they said price. And if it wasn't price, typically it was something driven by price. So it's not available here. Well, why isn't it available here? Obviously, we used to make essentially everything. So it's not available here. It's primarily because that industry, those companies were put out of business like the Singer factory was by all of the imports. So we say that at least 70% of the decision to import instead of source or produce locally is price driven. Fortunately, things are starting to get a bit better. We talk about reshoring and onshoring. They essentially mean the same thing. It's US companies, US headquarters companies, bringing back the manufacture of products that will be sold or assembled here. We also track FDI, foreign direct investment. So it's the same logic. For example, under FDI, Toyota might say, I'm going to build that car in the US instead of importing it. I'm going to make that engine here instead of importing it. Just like GM might make the same decision. They both decided that it's more profitable for them to produce in the market than to produce somewhere else and ship to the market. We also talk about localization, producing near the consumer. Rudy's going to talk about nearshoring. And my first priority is the US. So I prefer to have all the work come back to the US. But I know that there's some product that is so labor intensive and not subject to automation that you just cannot get it here. And therefore, I'd much rather have it, for example, in Mexico, where the wage rates are lower than in China and where it's about as far away as Texas. I'd much rather have the work in Mexico than say in China or India or somewhere else, because when it's in Mexico, if we need it, it's close by, we can get it. There's none of these interruptions and risks and disruptions that happen en route from places far across the world. And for the product coming out of Mexico, about 40% of the content of the value added is US content, tooling, materials, chemicals, what have you. Whereas product coming out of China, for example, is 5% US content. Would I rather have 40% than 5%? Sure. So nearshoring is fine if I cannot get it back into the US. So the trend has been very favorable. We were founded in 2010, and I've tracked here the number of jobs per year, not cumulative, but per year by reshoring by US companies and FDI by foreign headquartered companies, but all manufacturing in the United States. And in the first year, 2010, the total of those two was about 6,000 jobs. It peaked in 2017 at about 170,000, driven by the regulatory and tax cuts in 2017. It fell off with the trade wars, the business uncertainties. Companies said, I don't know what the tariffs are going to be, what the rules are going to be. I have no idea. Business uncertainties, so they stopped investing. They stopped doing anything. And then it picked up in 2020 because of COVID, PPE, pharmaceuticals, all kinds of things people started to make here because we couldn't get them from offshore, including for some countries, for example, China, refusing at times to ship us the things, partially because they needed them. And then it picked up even further in 2021. It looks like 230,000 jobs announced for 2021, driven substantially by other industries recognizing the problem that the medical industry had and the country and those industries deciding to do something. We've all read about the chip foundries going in, rare earth minerals, EV batteries, things like this that we used to be very dependent on offshore and now starting to come back to the United States. Other things driving this have been the rise in the Chinese labor costs. So partially or significantly due to the one-child policy, the workforce is declining in China as the demand grows because their economy has grown so much. And so this chart shows the indexed unit labor costs for a variety of countries. The red line is the US, so we're about flat. And we've had roughly 2% wage increases, something like 2% productivity increases to balance out. Whereas China has had 10 to 15% a year wage increases. They've had good productivity increases, but not enough to balance that off. Therefore, the labor cost of making the typical product has gone up substantially. So as a result, even before the trade wars, even before COVID, work was flowing out of China. A fair amount going to Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, places like that, but a share coming to the US. And then the trade wars and COVID made that even more problematic for companies. And so increasing percentages of the work coming to the US in the last year. Some other reasons driving this. E-commerce, I put up Amazon here as the example, but with e-commerce, you order something from Prime, you expect it today or tomorrow. And if they stock out in their warehouse, their distribution center, and if they're dependent on ocean shipment from halfway around the world, it's not going to happen. Whereas if they're getting it from your factory, 10, 15, 100 miles away, good chance that they're going to be able to respond to the surge in demand. Automation, a fair amount of automation happening helps U.S. labor costs overcome the higher cost of labor in the United States. A lot of companies in the U.S. will deal with smaller order quantities, whereas the foreign, especially Chinese companies, try to insist on container loads, infrequent shipments of large quantities. Consumers increasingly prefer a made in USA product, often hard to find. It makes sense to find a way to label, to list, to identify those made in USA products so the consumer can find them. Lean has helped. All these methodologies, the kind of things that the MEP, for example, offers. So during the height of the COVID, every night we were seeing doctors, nurses, worried about I don't have masks, I don't have gloves, this is horribly dangerous, and it was a horrible condition. But other industries have seen the same thing: electronic components, rare earth minerals, even pharmaceuticals, even the Defense Department every year or two puts out a report that identifies the raw materials, the components that are not available in the United States. Some they can get from allies, Canada, Mexico, Germany, somewhere like that, and some they have to get from potential adversaries like China or Russia, for example. Obviously not a good condition. So the country is starting to wake up and recognize these issues and to take actions to overcome them. So if you take a typical company, you can look back over the last 10, 15 years and think of the disruptions that we've had. The Japanese Fukushima tsunami, a lot of products you couldn't get for a while. The COVID crisis coming out of China, the Thai floods were a significant problem. There was a volcano in Iceland that stopped air freight from Europe for a couple of weeks. The Suez Canal blockage, remember, was a major crisis. What's that now? 5 months ago, 6 months ago. Our own LA dock strike, and there's talk about another LA dock strike coming up. So companies look at this and they say, this is starting to get serious. And to put it in perspective, I show here that the goods imports valued at U.S. price levels come out to over $3 trillion a year, whereas our total manufacturing production is about $2.5 trillion a year. So the point is, more than half of what we consume, including the components that companies are dependent upon, more than half of that comes from offshore. And therefore, if that is disrupted, it's not like you're disrupting 10% of what we need, you're disrupting 60% of what we actually consume. And the disruptions make it harder for the company to deliver on time, and making it and having difficult deliveries then impacts consumer loyalty. This survey asks consumers, if you don't get the thing when you expected to get it, what do? They say, I'll put up with it once, but I have less brand loyalty. If it happens to me a couple of times, I will stop purchasing that brand. So significant impacts, not just on your cost and your deliveries, but eventually on your consumption. Another consideration for this is based on the location of your suppliers. If you're a factory, you're assembling product, and you're getting product from Asia, somewhere, China, India, somewhere, and it takes months to get it there, and you've got lots of extra inventory because of the long deliveries, uncertain deliveries, and you've got a lot of product in the pipeline, and therefore when things slow down in a recession, like we had a year and a half ago, and like we might have sometime in the next year or two, probably will, then it takes months to get inventory back in balance. Whereas if you have a local supply, such that you get things in 2 weeks, you only keep a little bit of inventory on hand. When things fall off, your balance sheet gets back into balance very, very quickly. And the same way, when things pick up, as they've done now in the last year, that local supplier has a much better chance of responding quickly to your needs, whereas a foreign supplier, even in good times, even when the containers are available, even when you don't have boats sitting off of LA, it's months to get things here. Now it's 4 or 5 months. It's very, very difficult to respond to increases in demand. So there's a lot of discussion about lean. I was on an AME annual conference panel, and the question was, have companies gotten too lean? Is just in time, something of history and not going to work anymore? And everybody else said, yeah, companies probably got too lean. And I said, no, companies did not get lean enough, because if a company were truly lean, they would understand that bringing product or components in from halfway around the world brings no value to the customer. It wastes energy, it pollutes, it causes you to have too much inventory, uncertain quality, all these things. So everything about it is anti-lean. And so it isn't that companies got too lean, they did not get their supply chain lean enough. If they had done so, they could have gotten away with even less inventories than they had. And this is the ultimate risk. And I hope it doesn't happen. I pray it doesn't happen. But there's an increasing discussion about China decoupling from the United States. So China is furious over Taiwan, over Hong Kong, over the Uyghurs, over Trump and tariffs and all this kind of stuff. They feel we've damaged them substantially. And there's a bill in Congress, the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, that mentions how we're going to become more competitive against China. And when that was introduced, the Chinese government came out and said, if you pass that, we will stop exporting product to the United States, including, for example, for the automotive sector. So, no, is this going to happen? I sure hope not. But if I were the head of a company, and I'd look at all the components and material I received from China, and that my U.S. suppliers received from China, and said, if that all got shut off, and could be months, could be years until it came back, and I had to find all new suppliers somewhere in the world, would my company survive? And if you say it doesn't, then you should at least listen to the things that I'm going to tell you about how to identify the products that you can bring back at least equally profitably. So the result is companies look at this and they say, yeah, I ought to have my assembly plant in the United States, and I should have my components sourced preferably in the state, preferably in Arkansas, preferably somewhere in the US, preferably at least somewhere in North America, so that all those risks, all the disruptions can be eliminated. But companies still look at this and they say, darn, I'd love to buy in the US, but the US is still too expensive. I can get so many things for 30% less in China, India, and somewhere else, and therefore I'd like to do it, Harry, but no. And we say the reason you believe that is because you're looking only at the FOB price. You're looking at the wage rate, the FOB price, some purchase price variance, maybe at the landed cost, but you're not looking at the total cost of ownership. And Deming, most of you know Deming, and one of his key principles was that companies should stop buying on the basis of price and instead minimize total cost. And so we offer the total cost of ownership estimator, which is free online on our website. You go there, you sign up, you sign in, you use it. Has instructions, gives you help, gives you examples, all this kind of thing. And in this example, the Chinese FOB price was 70, the US was 100. So the procurement person looks at that and says, 30% difference, $30 difference. I'm going to buy 12,000 of those a year. That's $360,000 per year of purchase price variance. I'm going to send the new product off to China, and hell, that's a third or half of my objective. I'm going to get my bonus. I'm going to get promoted. Life's good. But when they look at total cost and see that for China it's 98 and US it's 108, so now it's only 10%. So this isn't so clear anymore. And projecting wage and currency and productivity trends forward, in a couple of years, the Chinese total cost is going to be higher than the US total cost. Now, hopefully the company will say, I think I shouldn't send the new product off to get manufactured there because a couple of years from now, it's going to make sense to bring it back and it's difficult to move the tooling and the people and the technology. No, I'm not going to send it off. And I'm going to start thinking about how to get the products that are already offshore back here, new investments in our facility, suppliers, hiring, training, whatever it takes to strategically move that work back to the United States. So to show you the power of this, I took the first 190 cases where the users, they had done the math, they used our system, and they compared China to the US. They had a given part, they had a US FOB price, a Chinese FOB price, answered a bunch of questions, and the blue chart, the blue line shows the Chinese FOB price as a percentage of the US price. And you can see the mode of it, the peak is around 70, okay? At 100, they're equal. Above 100, the US price is lower. And for the exact same parts done by the users, here's the red line. And now you can see that the peak has come up to about 85. And if there happened to be a 15% Trump tariff, then the yellow line up here. So the key thing to look at is based on price out of this sample of 190 products, 8% of the cases the US had the lowest price, 32% we had the lowest total cost, and 46% total cost with a 15% tariff. So the point is, and my sort of elevator speech on this is, if companies will do the math, will use total cost of ownership, will consider all these factors, that 20, 30% of what they think they're getting most profitably from that offshore location, they would actually be more profitable sourcing or producing in the US. So what can you do? I assume most of you are suppliers, you're contract manufacturers, you make components that you sell on to some bigger company that go into an assembly, something like that. So in your own work, you can use total cost, but also as a sales tool to convince your customers to look at the total cost. For bigger companies, you see if they're in the business roundtable, which in 2019, these 190, I think, CEOs of major companies came out and said, our commitment is to stakeholders, isn't just shareholders anymore, but to suppliers, that's you, employees and community. And if they're not doing that, if they're only looking at the price, then they're not taking care of their suppliers, their employees, and their communities. They all talk about their green commitments. Well, they'll call them to task on that. Many of you have heard of ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And we did a study of an aluminum die casting, either made in China and shipped here or made here, and compared the CO2 emissions in the two cases. And because China uses much more coal to produce their electricity, and rather dirty coal, and product has to be shipped, the CO2 emissions from the Chinese option is about 25 to 50% higher than for the make it here locally U.S. option. And you can say the same things about the social impact on unemployment, many of the problems that we have in the United States. So a couple of Arkansas cases. The first two I found happened to be plastic injection molders, but that makes a lot of sense because it's a relatively automated process. Okay, so I'm just putting those two up, and I hope they're both doing very well. And then one that just came up, and Heidi pointed out to me, I think yesterday, was Envirotech. So electric vehicles, putting a plant into Osceola, relatively small company right now, but planning a 800 employee facility. So I'm hoping that works out. And they had been importing these products, and now they're going to produce them here. So therefore, it's reshoring. So this is my favorite case. Moricorp is a company located outside Chicago. They're an EMS company. They populate circuit boards, make assemblies of some kinds from the circuit boards. And two interesting stories. They had a quality issue with a housing they were buying, a die-cast housing, and their customer was furious because of the problem. Maybe it had a leak, and they found a local Illinois source. They fixed the problem, and then they went back and audited, and they found that their inventory of the product was reduced by 94% because they didn't have the extra safety stock and the buffer stock and the long lead times and uncertainty and all this kind of thing. So just as a rough rule of thumb, cutting the inventory in half would be a very reasonable target. You can imagine going to your customer and say, I know how to cut your inventory of those things in half. How? Buy from me. Second case, they came to me about 5 years ago, and they said, Harry, we're about to lose a really big order. Can you help us? And I said, well, the Chinese have offered a lower price. And so I helped Tony, the VP sales, do the TCO calculation. He took it to the customer, showed the customer that from the customer's perspective, Maury's offer, although it had the higher price, had the lower total cost. And I have a letter from Tony saying that was the key to winning a $60 million order. I'd love to help any of you win a $500,000 order or whatever it is. That would be great for you. So we have a program to help make this happen. This is called the Import Substitution Program, and a company can put up a product. Could be a contract manufactured part, a fan, a pump, or whatever it is, and we can tell you who the biggest importers are of those products, whom they're buying them from offshore, what tonnage they're bringing in, roughly what they're paying for them, and then train you to use the TCO to convince those companies to buy from you, just in effect to repeat the Maury success. So if any of you are interested in that, love to hear from you. Sometimes at these bigger companies, you wind up with problems with procurement. I've had salesmen from contract manufacturers tell me, I've been to the company and I say, I'd like to sell you those tools, whatever it is. And the procurement person says, well, I'm getting from China for 30% less, you'd have to match that. And the salesman says, well, I've heard you've had warranty issues and quality issues and delivery issues and travel and all kinds of stuff. Procurement says, that's not in my budget, that's somebody else's budget. I only deal with the price. So in that case, you have to go around them and talk to quality, talk to inventory, talk to manufacturing, talk to the general manager. There's been cases where the general manager has ordered procurement to consider all the relevant factors instead of just the price. Another thing you can do is promote reshoring on your website. So we've got maybe a dozen cases of companies that on their website say, reshore, are you concerned about deliveries from offshore? Are you having quality issues? Can't deliver, all kinds of issues. We can help you. Bring the work back home. We know how to fix this problem for you. So interesting case here. We and three other organizations, NTMA, PMA, and AMT. AMT puts on IMTS, the big machine tool show. So the four of us put on the National Metalworking Reshoring Award, which was won in 2021 by Acme Alliance, which is an aluminum die caster outside Chicago. And one reason that we picked them is that first, they're very successful. They reshored a lot of products, but also they within their company structure, they have the factory in Illinois, but they also have factories in Brazil and China. So they have two low labor cost country factories, and they swear to me, they never have imported product from either of those countries to meet the demand in the United States. They always meet the demand here by producing here. So to me, the man who's tempted and turns down the temptation is a saint, and I think these guys are saints. So I recognize them that very highly. So there's another contest for 2022, and you can either an OEM can apply, a supplier can apply, if someone who reshored for the OEM. Foreign direct investment also counts, but it has to be a metalworked product of some kind. You can find it on our website and on AMT's. So this, I think, is rather insightful. This is Gartner, a very credible organization. And this fellow said, it's not the type of disruption that determines the supply chain impact, it's the type of supply chain that determines the impact of the disruption. So rather than saying, we've been impacted, what are we going to do? It's design your supply chain, generally as much local as you can manage, so that the impact of any disruption will be smaller. So we're a nonprofit with 32 sponsors. I mentioned AMT a couple of times up there. Morris, big machine tool distributor, GF, that's the company I used to run in North America, and these other trade associations and organizations, another machine tool distributor here. So we've been honored to be supported by all these groups that lets us support you. So here's my contact information. You've got my phone number, my email address, our website, links to many of the things that I've talked about. And I'm hoping that you will follow up with those. And if you've got a reshoring case, I'd love to hear about it, so we can, because we only can track the number of jobs by hearing about the cases. And if you have an opportunity in your company or at your customer to convince somebody to reshore, to at least to think about reshoring, email me, call me, let us help you get the ball rolling. So I pass this back. First, I'd also like to thank Heidi and Rudy for all their good work for getting this organized and enticing all of you to come in and listen. And I look forward to your questions.
Harry, thank you so much. That's fabulous. You were talking about trying to narrow the gap. You're at 23% difference and 13% difference, and you and I are very, very familiar, obviously, with the manufacturers extension program, or here in Arkansas, the Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions, which is actually a federal and state program that's housed at the Arkansas Economic Development Commission. And Arkansas Manufacturing Solution, or AMS as we call them, are the experts in lean and kata and all these different methodologies for narrowing that gap, making you more lean, so that you can, in fact, narrow the price difference and be able to tell your constituency, your board, that the price difference is either zero or very close to zero, and even mitigating risk, as you and I talked about. So make sure that, and we'll have their contact information later on, but do know that the people who can help you actually accomplish the goal of reshoring and trying to be lean and trying to get closer to that zero difference here in Arkansas is Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions.
Rudy, let me add one thing to that.
Yes, sir.
Imagine you've got this typical Chinese price gap of 30%, and if you come to me and say, Harry, can you get rid of all that with TCO? I say probably not. Maybe 20 points of it go away with it by looking at these hidden costs. Now you got 30% down to a 10% TCO difference. And then if the MEP can come in and help you knock 10% out of your manufacturing costs, now we've closed the whole gap. So the combination of using TCO to identify what that final TCO gap is, and then getting the MEP in to overcome that residual 5–10%, that's feasible. Whereas if you called the MEP and said, I want to get rid of a 30%, I want a 30% reduction in my manufacturing costs, they're going to say, unless you're filing on a dirt floor, it's probably not going to happen. So I think it's a great synergy between the two organizations.
Absolutely, the combination of those two things is what's going to get you there. No question about that. Thank you, Harry. Um, so, kind of a full disclosure before I go into my presentation about nearshoring, and I'm an old union guy, and from that perspective, yeah, I'd like to see everything made in the United States. But the reality is, as Harry outlined, is there are certain things that can't that for a variety of reasons that can't be done. And so nearshoring is an additional tool to be able to help uh, get as much close to you as possible. I mentioned early on that I used to work for the Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions and actually retired there at the end of the year. And I was dealing with these supply chain issues and exporting and importing and tariffs and whatnot. And the thing is that a lot of Arkansas companies and companies all over the United States and really all over the world went out of business because, or at the very least, downsized the number of employees dramatically. And the reason was because they could not get the supplies, the materials, the parts they need to be able to finish, or in some cases even start the production of whatever widgets they were making. And one of the things that I find that's really troubling is that a lot of people really don't understand their supply chain. I asked them, so where do you get your stuff from? It's, well, Bob in California, and I use that example all the time. Bob in California, but what they don't really understand is that Bob is is getting his stuff from Malaysia, China, X, i.e. the supply chain distance is really, really long, and in many cases multifaceted. Um, he's getting one part from Malaysia, he's getting two parts from China, he's getting another part from Taiwan, on and on. And then he sends you his, part that you're going to use to be able to complete your production. And so the fact that a company does not understand their supply chain and that they think that they're getting their stuff from Bob, and so long as they can call Bob in California and get it, but it doesn't work that way at all. And so a lot of companies risked to their demise the fact that they could get their stuff from Bob just by making a phone call. And so I guess the first thing that I want to point out to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that it is critical that you monitor, to ascertain and monitor your supply chain. Find out from Bob in California where he's getting his stuff from, and what the lead times are, and pay attention to what's going on. If he tells you that he's getting some part from Malaysia or Taiwan or wherever, I mean, look at events that are going to impact that. As a matter of fact, Harry mentioned the Japanese electrical, the nuclear plant debacle that occurred, and for several months, I want to say 4 or 5 months, Harry, you may remember the exact time frame. There were certain things that you could not get, like for instance, a lot of the Japanese car manufacturers could not get stuff because the things that they needed were in that part of the country, and it was just shut down. And so and now we're seeing, like, for instance, you guys have probably passed through car lots, and the car lots are almost empty. Why? Because the chips that are needed to be able to um, um, have the electronics in vehicles, they can't get them, and consequently, their Toyota and GM and everybody else is unable to manufacture the car, finish manufacturing the vehicles, and so that's why used cars have gone up dramatically, because that's what's available. Whereas new cars are really hard to get hold of, and you're going to pay through the nose for them because there's so few of them. So all of that to just say that it's really important that you monitor your supply chain. And Ms. Heidi, if we can switch over to the USMCA. First of all, I want to thank my colleague Ernesto Pinal, who is the CEO of Export Optimizers, for this slide. I thought it was a great slide. He used it in a previous presentation that I moderated for the National Association of District Export Councils. And I thought it really laid out well the value proposition, I guess you could say, of the United States Mexico Canada agreement, what we used to be known as NAFTA, but was revised and updated, and it took into account things that really kind of didn't exist, e-commerce for one thing. That didn't exist before when NAFTA was first formulated, and talks about the different things that are current with the USMCA and why it creates a situation where nearshoring, when we can't reshore every single piece of what we're doing, why nearshoring makes a big difference and why it works. Obviously, this is a triad between the United States, Mexico, and Canada, our neighbors. And so from that very perspective, and in fact, just for a second, from that perspective alone, utilizing the free trade agreement, this USMCA free trade agreement, makes a lot of sense, if for no other reason than distance. First of all, these are allies of ours, and so we're not having to count on on China or other countries that are not allies, and the distance is very close. I mean, probably in most cases, under normal circumstances, the travel time from getting something from Canada or Mexico to Arkansas is a week, 2 weeks on the outside, versus 3 months from China under normal circumstances. And of course, right now, we definitely do not have normal circumstances, right? So under the best circumstances, you're looking at 3 months for China and other countries like that have that kind of a distance, and a week or two if we're talking about Mexico and Canada. And as you can see here, here are some of the advantages of utilizing this free trade agreement. I won't read them, but you can read them just as well as I can. But I will say that it creates a level playing field, in the sense that being able to sell to Mexico, able to sell to Canada, Mexico and Canada being able to ship stuff to us is a much more flat playing field, because the tariffs are either non-existent, i.e. zero, or very close to zero in almost every case. And so there isn't this additional duties, tariffs, that one has to pay if you're bringing stuff in from China or Germany, Italy, Malaysia, Taiwan, which those tariffs can be anywhere from a minimum of, let's say, 15% to as high as 35% in the case of China. And so we have this advantage of being able to have a short supply line, which means that you don't have to have as much inventory. And one of the things I tell my clients is, when you're looking at inventory, what instead of seeing, nuts and bolts or whatever it is that you have in inventory, instead of seeing, those nuts and bolts, what you really should be seeing is stacks of dollars sitting on the shelves, because that's precisely what they are. Dollars that you really can't utilize, because they're just, they're there, and you're having to wait to be able to utilize them. And so the more inventory you have, the more stacks of dollars you have on the shelves. And so having a short supply line really helps in terms of minimizing the amount of inventory that you have tied up dollars that you have tied up in inventory, and once again shorten that supply chain to be able to you know, maybe not just in time, but being able to turn things around much more quickly, and having being able to depend on our partners, our trade partners, and really our security and defense partners, Mexico and Canada, that we don't have the same kind of problems that we have in other countries. And so I guess to kind of sum that up is, do you want to uh, risk and depend the welfare of your company, the very existence of your company, and the welfare of your employees by depending on long supply chains, and you know, security risk and all these things? I mean, we got to look at these things differently nowadays, because it's the reality of things. And so um, reshoring, I'd love to be able to see, you know, companies reshore at least 50% of what they're currently buying in other countries, and maybe, you know, 25% to Mexico and 25% to Canada, in order to be able to have, you know, stuff can happen, you know, stuff can happen in Mexico, stuff can happen in Canada, stuff can happen here in the United States, and always having secondary and tertiary suppliers. And ladies and gentlemen, you know, in many cases, what happens is, well, I'm only buying from Bob in California, or I'm only buying from this one factory in China, or wherever it is, because they can give me the cheapest price. But you know, once again, that doesn't take into account risk. And so they have only one supplier. And even when we're talking about, just for a second, even if we were talking about that all our suppliers were in the United States, you know, buying from only one supplier, even in the United States, is risky business. The factory can burn down, they can go out of business, XYZ. And so having more than one supplier is just good business sense. And so, you know, once again, I'd like to really urge you to expand the number of suppliers. I want to urge you to find out, in fact, what your supply chain really looks like, and to monitor it. And I think at this point, if we have no
Rudy,
question, yes, sir, go ahead.
I mean, just something you can add to that story that you make about the dollars, you know, relative to the bolts, nuts and bolts. You should the company should realize that eventually they're going to burn some of the dollars because they're going to have obsolete inventory,
Hmm.
or it's going to be defective, it's going to rust, it's going to do something. So by having all that excess inventory, some of it you're going to burn, and it's burn the dollars. So you should add that to your story next time you tell it.
Absolutely. And you know, and stuff becomes obsolete. I used to own an IT company many years ago, at a period of time where the technology was changing so quickly, and I had quite a bit of inventory, and I wound up you know, throwing away a lot of stuff that became obsolete. And I mean, dollars basically flushed down the toilet because things became obsolete. And so to stay competitive, you have to be modifying your product offerings all the time. And if you've got a bunch of money tied up in old inventory, it doesn't allow you to make the shift as quickly as you need to be making it. So being lean is really important. Having not a whole lot of inventory on hand, being able to switch it out, having short supply chains, and on partners that you can count is really important. And I also want to urge you to work with the Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions folk to be able to get that last 12% of efficiencies, to be able to accomplish what Harry has been talking about. And at this point, we'll open it up for questions. Ms. Heidi, let me actually. I think that we had previously, before the webinar. I think somebody sent in a couple of questions. Did they not?
I saw some of those questions,
Oh,
and
no,
so
no,
I,
did you see them?
yeah,
Okay.
I
Yeah,
can remember them.
Harry,
Yeah.
can you mention that?
Yeah, so one of the questions, it comes down to productivity and automation. And we see articles by people talking about taxing the robots, and don't let the robots take all of our jobs. And And are we going to be better off automating or not automating? And we say automation is absolutely necessary because you have to somehow offset the higher labor costs in the United States. So you have to automate as best as you can. And in reality, because we have such a big potential to reshore, because this 40% that I'm talking about, because such a big potential, we can automate, bring work back because we're more competitive and have more jobs and better paid jobs and higher tech jobs rather than not automating and losing even more to offshore. So we say that we will lose more jobs to automation in China and South Korea if we do not automate than we will to US automation if we do automate. So the answer is get going, automate more.
Right, for sure. Well, very good. I do not see any other questions at this point, but Harry, I want to thank you for the great information and for what you do, for the passion that you have, and for being kind of the driving force in the United States on this reshoring initiative.
Let me point out the phone number you've got up there now is my old Illinois phone number, which is not accurate. So the correct phone number is the one I had on my slide, which is 847-867-1144. So if anybody wants to call me, and I'm looking forward to your calls, I want to help you. I want you to succeed.
Yeah. Harry, would you repeat the number again slowly?
Yeah, 847-867-1144. So
Yeah, and my
that's on
apologies for
my
that.
slide. That's why I read them. So, so again, I hope some of the attendees will say, I got a great story to tell you, Harry, about reshoring, or Harry, I've got a great opportunity, but I need your help. So either of those, call me, email me, and let's make it happen together. I've got 5 million jobs to bring back. I can't do it by myself. It's going to take all of us working together.
Yeah, Harry's my hero, man. I'll tell you what. In any case, Harry, again, thank you so much, and thank you for the Arkansas Manufacturing Solutions for sponsoring this series of supply chain and trade related webinars. And I guess we will call it a day. Thank you so much. We are recording this session, and it'll be available in a couple of days. Ms. Heidi, is there anything else that you want to say in terms of that?
They also will receive their the slides and as a handout. So that's it. Yeah, I'll get that out as soon as I can.
Super. All right, guys, thank you so much, and you all have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.